The dark horizon was shredded by the long burning streaks of Russian missiles hurtling toward Ukraine. The atmosphere vibrated with successive shockwaves. High above U.S., fighters paved the way for a counterattack with cascades of crimson flares, while the sea surface roiled in layers as American anti-submarine bombs dropped, sending up a series of towering water columns. The conflict stemmed from Russia expanding its control over the airspace adjacent to Ukraine, shattering regional stability and triggering a U.S. response. The confrontation between the three forces was no longer a calculated standoff, but had shifted directly into full-scale kinetic conflict. U.S. submarines hidden deep beneath the waves launched packages of guided torpedoes toward the Russian formation. On shore, Ukraine activated early warning radars and a dense air defense grid. Russian aircraft swarmed the maritime zone, forcing Ukrainian jets toward the coastal ridges. Fire smoke and explosions merged into a ceaseless rhythm of combat. Each force strove to break the stalemate. Every move pulled a retaliatory strike in its wake. The war had reached the point of no return. 0, 3, 4, 1. The airspace over the Black Sea became unstable when Ukraine's early warning belt recorded scattered radar signals originating from the direction of Russian-occupied Crimea. On the control screens, clusters of fast-moving blips pressed tight against Ukrainian airspace in a low-altitude dispersed formation. The Ukrainian command immediately determined this was no longer a routine exercise, but the opening move of a genuine aerial offensive campaign. 0347. Ukraine's air control system confirmed a total of 60 Russian Su-35 and Su-30 fighters crossing the maritime exclusion zone. Ukraine announced the highest alert level, authorizing the activation of all F-16 and MiG-29 fighters for immediate sortie. The atmosphere at the command center was thick with tension. While Ukraine was still adjusting its squadrons, a flight of 8 Russian Su-35 seconds unexpectedly dropped altitude, opened into a V formation, and launched a salvo of short-range rockets at Ukraine's coastal radar stations. Rocket pods flipped open beneath the bellies of the fighters. Round after round rained down from an altitude of just a few hundred meters, leaving white, luminous trajectories cutting through the night. The first salvo struck directly into the radar station in the Mykolaiv region, creating a sheet of fire tens of meters high. Multiple Ukrainian radar antennas collapsed amidst heavy tremors. Southern Ukraine immediately put 2 Patriot air defense batteries into firing status. From the launchers, interceptors tore upward in near vertical arcs, leaving widening trails of white smoke drifting with the sea breeze. One Ukrainian missile activated its heat seeker, locking onto a Russian Su-30, attempting to hide beneath a thin cloud layer. The explosion created a flash that expanded into a massive fireball. The Su-30 lost control, rolled right, and plunged into the sea, sending a geyser of water high into the air. News of the downed fighter caused the Russian formation to shift tactics. A group of Su-35 seconds immediately accelerated to high altitude to suppress fire and protect the remaining formation. Ukraine was forced to withdraw backup radar stations into anti-jamming mode as frequency signals were being heavily blocked by Russian electronic warfare technology. 0359. The U.S. European Command received reports from Ukraine. The U.S. Air Force decided to deploy an F-35 squadron from Aviano Air Base toward the Ukrainian periphery to assess the threat, deeming this a direct escalation event manufactured by Russia. The curtain had risen on the crisis, and all three parties, Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S., understood that this was merely the first band of a massive storm moving in very close. 0412. On the waters south of Ukraine, Ukrainian naval observation stations began recording unusual movement from the direction of the Kerch Strait. Radar reflections moving at a steady speed indicated Russia was deploying multiple Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates approaching the air defense identification zone. Ukraine assessed this as an expansion of the Russian campaign to lock down the maritime flank and support the ongoing airstrikes. While Ukrainian air defense forces were still processing the aerial attack, Russia continued to introduce a group of Orion suicide attack, UAVs flying, skimming the sea surface into the battle space. The Russian UAV formation dropped to an altitude of just a few dozen meters to evade radar, exploiting the thick sea mist on the water at dawn. From the Ukrainian observation post, the jet sound of the UAVs was swallowed by the roar of the waves, creating a dangerous layer of approach. 0419. The Ukrainian Navy dispatched an Ada-class corvette into position to block the movement channel of the Russian escorts. On the deck, combat crews activated the Neptune anti-ship missile system. In the pale light of dawn, the launchers rotated gradually eastward, locking onto the approaching Russian escort formation. Simultaneously, the Russian Orion UAVs accelerated straight toward the Ukrainian corvette. The electronic countermeasure system on the Ukrainian ship quickly switched to guidance blocking mode, emitting dense jamming signals to cut the Russian control link. However, one UAV maintained a stable flight path and barreled into the defensive firing range. From the deck, the OTO Melara close-in weapon system opened fire. Rounds of 76 millimeters ammunition created a tracer stream, sweeping across the sky, striking the first Russian UAV. The drone exploded into a cluster of red fire debris, falling to the sea surface amidst a prolonged rumble. The remaining two UAVs continued to rush in, forcing the Ukrainian gunnery crew to adjust their rate of fire and widen the firing angle to prevent the risk of close approach. 0, 4, 2, 5. The order to launch anti-ship missiles was broadcast by Ukraine. Two Neptune missiles left the rails with roiling hot gas, flying a sea-skimming trajectory straight toward the Russian frigate formation. At sea, the Russian ships began deploying infrared decoys and accelerated away from the attack vector. However, one Ukrainian missile still acquired the target. A blast erupted on the hull of the lead Russian escort, creating a column of fire tens of meters high, marking the expansion of hostilities from the air down to the sea surface. The Ukrainian Navy understood this was only the second round of confrontation and a turbulent night showing no signs of stopping. 0458. At Ukraine's Signal Analysis Center, military engineers noticed anomalies in data traffic from the military telecommunications network. Signal packets with deviated frequencies originating from multiple points in the western region indicated Russia was deploying a large-scale cyber intrusion campaign. The goal was to seize control of satellite communication stations and disrupt Ukraine's command rhythm before the conflict escalated to the next strategic tier. At the same time, U.S. space stations recorded multiple orbital changes from a group of Russian remote sensing satellites. One satellite monitored by the U.S. began lowering its orbit, bringing its observation swath right up to the Ukrainian coastline. The U.S. assessed this was not merely routine reconnaissance, but a preparatory step for Russia to combine cyber warfare with long-range weapon strikes. 057 amperes, simultaneous cyber attack targeted Ukraine's early warning radar system. Radar stations in the Odessa and Kherson regions experienced automated command lines, paralyzing their scanning functions. Technicians were forced to disconnect these two stations from the command network to prevent malware from spreading. Ukraine's communication space was pulled into near silence for several minutes, creating a dangerous gap for Russia to exploit. The U.S. immediately deployed a cybersecurity team from the Logistics Support Center in Europe to establish a data defense line protecting Ukraine. From the Ramstein base, a specialized U.S. team activated a remote malware analysis system to identify the attack source. Code strings showed Russia using a distributed attack network from at least 1,000,000 different connection points scattered across the coastal region. While the digital space was in chaos, Russia continued to push a new form of attack. A Russian cyber task force used radio jamming equipment placed on an Admiral Gorshkov-class destroyer to lock the command transmission frequencies between Ukrainian warships and the command center. At sea, Ukrainian radio signals were heavily jammed, causing many ships to lose positioning data for several minutes. Ukraine responded by activating backup communications using secure low-frequency waves. Simultaneously, the U.S. deployed electronic suppression measures from an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft patrolling south of Ukraine. The U.S. aircraft emitted counter signals, weakening the Russian jamming equipment. The clash in the digital domain had opened a new front where every conflict took place in the shadows of data and signals, but its effects could define the entire battle, shifting to a more dangerous threshold. 0542. The sky south of Ukraine began to turn the pale gray of dawn when the ground warning system picked up engine signals from multiple Russian Ka-52 and Mi-8 helicopters. The helicopter formation was advancing on a low approach vector just a few dozen meters above the sea to enter landing range. Ukraine assessed this as the opening sign of a special forces infiltration campaign aimed at destroying remaining active radar stations and auxiliary command points. In the dim light of daybreak, the Ukrainian military deployed mobile defense units up the coastal hills. From high positions, soldiers clearly observed the heat shimmer from the Russian helicopter rotors beating down on the water. Some helicopters carried repelling gear along with special forces equipped with AK-12 assault rifles and night vision goggles. 0549. While the Russian helicopters continued to close in Ukraine, launched tactical reconnaissance UAVs to create an observation net from above. The small Ukrainian drones spiraled upward, scanning for infrared signals and detecting 3 suspicious assembly points of Russian forces on the sea surface. The information was immediately relayed to the forward command post. To intercept the Russian air assault, Ukraine utilized Avenger self-propelled air defense systems positioned along the ridges. From the turrets, low-altitude missiles were launched at high velocity, creating streaks of light cutting across the sky. One missile struck the lead Russian Mi-8, causing the airframe to shudder violently before banking and crashing into the sea. In the air, the remaining Russian helicopters immediately initiated a counterattack by firing close-range rockets at the positions where Ukrainian UAVs had been detected. White smoke trails from Russian rockets swept straight into the hillside, sending up bursts of earth and rock. Below on the sea, the Russian Special Forces team, moving by high-speed, rigid-hull boats, began approaching the shore to coordinate with the helicopter force. 0557, Ukraine delivered a retaliatory strike with a rapid response commando team dropped from Black Hawk helicopters. The Ukrainian team landed on a rocky coastal beach amidst the sound of engines echoing off the cliffs. They fanned out in an open formation and used Fort 221 assault rifles to fire upon the Russian high-speed boats. One boat was hit in the forward compartment, killing the engine. The craft spun around and listed heavily. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, both Russia and Ukraine understood that the amphibious operation was shifting to its most decisive phase. The initial skirmishes were merely the crust of a long, volatile day ahead. 0, 6, 2, 1. On the western coast, Ukrainian artillery units simultaneously moved into position as the air track system reported Russia was deploying Tornado-S rocket artillery batteries from the north of Krasnodar Krai. Electronic reconnaissance antennas recorded multiple heat emission points, increasing rapidly along the Russian vertical coastline, signaling a large-scale fire mission was about to commence. Meanwhile, at sea, Ukrainian Navy radar detected a new development. Multiple signal streams indicated Russia was activating Caliber cruise missile launchers positioned on 2 Slava-class cruisers. The launch vector stretched along the northeast axis, potentially targeting Ukrainian air bases in the central region. Ukraine determined this was the moment Russia shifted to long-range fire attacks to overwhelm the entire defensive system. 0627 Ukrainian HIMARS batteries were ordered to open fire. From the hills behind the city, volleys of missiles moving on, high ballistic trajectories launched upward, leaving columns of brown dust curling in the morning wind. The scream of rocket motors reverberated through the valleys, creating a powerful resonance lasting across the rocky terrain. This counter-battery fire aimed to strike the Russian Tornado-S assembly area. As the light grew stronger, Russian Su-34 tactical bombers appeared at medium altitude. The Russian formation widened into 2 wings and released a barrage of guided bombs down in the area suspected of housing Ukrainian artillery. Light trails from the guidance kits on the bomb noses swept down to the ground, creating large, clear designation points. Ukrainian units had to maneuver off the artillery site just before the first series of explosions slammed down. From the south, the Ukrainian Air Force sent an F-16 flight to intercept. The Ukrainian fighters accelerated, climbing to thousands of meters before suddenly changing direction, firing air-to-air missiles at the Su-34 flight. One Russian Su-34 was locked before the pilot could escape the danger zone. A pillar of fire erupted from the fuselage, forcing the entire Russian formation to drop to a lower altitude and scatter away from the interception zone. 0639 Ukraine deployed the Patriot missile defense system to intercept the approaching Caliber wave. From launchers stationed in the central region, the missiles were activated, flying large, curved paths toward the upper atmosphere. The intersection of early morning sunlight and the missile defense grid created a chaotic scene of modern warfare. Russia and Ukraine had now entered a phase of total engagement, where attack vectors spanned the sky, the ground, and the narrow strip of sea between the 2 shores. 0712. Beneath the early waves of the Black Sea, a Russian Kilo-class submarine moved slowly in absolute silence. Passive sonar systems continuously received weak reflections from the south, where the Ukrainian Navy was believed to be deploying an anti-submarine frigate group. Russia judged this the opportune moment to launch a surprise underwater attack to reverse the battlefield momentum tilting toward Ukraine. On the surface, a Ukrainian Krivak-class frigate, Hetman Sahaidatny, ran at low speed to maintain accuracy for its towed sonar array. From the Combat Information Center, the Ukrainian control officer monitored screens displaying hydroacoustic frequency bands fluctuating abnormally. The sonar team identified an object tens of meters long shifting north-south just a few hundred meters from the ship's position. 0717. The Russian submarine released acoustic decoys to mislead the Ukrainian sonar. Small metal devices dropped into the water, emitting sound sequences, simulating propeller noise, blurring the Russian submarine's true signal. The Ukrainian sonar crew had to adjust the entire frequency filter bank to eliminate false signals, slowing their reaction speed. In that short window, the Russian submarine fired a heat-seeking torpedo aimed at the Ukrainian frigate. From the surface, only a small vortex was visible before the torpedo sped away at high velocity. Sensors on the Ukrainian ship warned with a steady frequency, detecting an object accelerating on a direct approach. Ukraine immediately deployed thermal decoys and turned the ship to reduce the signal cross-section. Launchers on the deck fired burning red flares that sank into the water, creating a strong thermal interference field to fool the Russian torpedo seeker. Thanks to the sharp turn, the torpedo veered right and detonated amidst whitecaps, sending a water column tens of meters high. Responding immediately, the Ukrainian frigate fired a Mark 46 anti-submarine torpedo. Active sonar emitted short sound pings in a wide sweep to pin the Russian submarine's location. On the seabed, the torpedo rushed forward at medium depth and high speed, creating a hydroacoustic vibration trail stretching hundreds of meters. Warning alarms inside the Russian submarine blared as the Mark 46 seeker began locking onto the target. The submarine had to immediately change depth, executing a near vertical dive to break the seeker's lock. Black water at the sea bottom churned as the Kilo dived, leaving a large vortex behind. In the deep water, the pursuit between the two guidance heads played out in a near-silent environment where only the sounds of water pressure, impact, and sweeping sonar signals remained. However, forcing the submarine to dive deep caused the entire Russian plan for a surprise underwater attack to fail. 0805. The eastern horizon off Ukraine showed multiple anomalies on the electromagnetic spectrum. Russia deployed a formation of Su-30 SM electronic warfare aircraft flying a few hundred meters above the sea, using multi-frequency directional antennas to create powerful jamming waves. Bands of high-frequency microwaves swept across the sky, causing signal blips on Ukrainian radar screens to jump erratically. Ukraine determined Russia was expanding the front to the east to stretch the entire defensive network. Meanwhile, southern Ukraine recorded multiple infrared signals from a group of Russian stealth UAVs approaching in a dispersed formation. Each UAV carried a module to neutralize communications via high-frequency pulses aimed at communication hubs located in Ukraine's coastal zone. From high above, UAVs with wingspans of several meters flew almost silently, skimming low cloud layers, making visual observation difficult. 0812. Ukraine deployed ground-based electronic warfare units to counter. Transmitters placed along the mountain slopes activated active counter-jamming modes, creating packets of false frequency data to sever the Russian UAV control links. On control screen, symbols indicated some Russian UAVs beginning to destabilize due to loss of the primary command channel. Simultaneously in the northeastern sky, two Ukrainian airborne early warning aircraft circled at thousands of meters to scan and reanalyze the entire electronic picture. From the cockpit, the Ukrainian tactical crew observed many spatial zones having their signals distorted, reducing target localization capability. To restore the scan sweep, the aircraft had to activate multi-layer frequency filtering algorithms, stripping away each band of interference Russia was laying down. 0819. Russia struck harder by having two Su-35 seconds launch active jamming pods toward Ukraine's mobile radar stations. Extremely powerful electromagnetic pulses caused all Ukrainian radar screens to switch to signal compression mode for several seconds. Ukraine immediately maneuvered backup radar stations to different positions to avoid being locked. In response, Ukraine used defensive UAVs flying high to drop microwave reflectors into the air. These devices created dozens of false return points, forcing the Russian UAV guidance systems to process massive amounts of data, slowing their approach speed. One Russian UAV strayed from formation and crashed into the Eastern Sea after its navigation signals were completely deceived. 0826. Combat in the eastern and southern airspace of Ukraine turned into an electromagnetic maze where every wave pulse and every return signal could turn the tide of battle. Russia's expansion of the front in multiple directions created distinct pressure, but Ukraine's defensive layers stood firm. 0902. While the eastern airspace remained chaotic with electronic waves, Russia unexpectedly opened a new offensive wave with a direct cyber attack on Ukraine's central coordination system. From servers deep within the Russian mainland, dozens of malware packets were sent into Ukraine's satellite connection ports, continuously hammering firewalls. On control screens in the Ukrainian war room, multiple icons turned red, signaling the system was being torn apart piece by piece. In Odessa, where one of Ukraine's critical communication coordination centers was located, cyber defense specialists were handling abnormal traffic volumes exceeding server capacity. Transmission speeds dropped sharply, causing battlefield maps to update tens of seconds late, creating dangerous latency. The Ukrainian team had to temporarily switch to independent workstation routing to maintain connections between defensive units. In the nearshore waters of the southwest, Russia deployed an additional layer of attack using small, ultra-low flying UAVs. These drones, less than a few meters long, skimmed the water using sensors to home in on emissions from transmission stations. Low speed and small size made them difficult for radar to catch. Ukraine detected them late when ground sensors recorded abnormal vibrations from the sea. 0, 9, 10 amperes. Russian UAV crashed straight into a relay antenna atop a technical building in the south of the city. The explosion was not large, but sufficient to snap the antenna mast, causing the surrounding area to lose partial communication. Ukrainian units were forced to switch to a backup link system using buried fiber optic lines. However, this transition caused battlefield orders to be delayed by several minutes. In the northern operations room, Ukrainian tactical officers noticed many communication channels being severed in clusters. Display screens showed multiple gaps due to lost data from outpost stations. Some Ukrainian air defense units in the central region had to engage targets autonomously without receiving full guidance from the center. 0917. Russia continued to introduce a high-intensity microwave jamming system into the battlefield, targeting the signal transmission line between Ukraine's two main command centers. In seconds, Ukraine's entire high-frequency signal band was locked, preventing command bulletins from being transmitted. The Ukrainian war room switched to limited automation status, but the loss of high-level linkage was gradually weakening the coordination system. 0922. Ukraine's command network was fractured into disjointed segments, creating a risk of tactical desynchronization. Russia had succeeded in forcing Ukraine's defensive layers to operate in a makeshift status, opening a disadvantageous situation and pushing the entire battlefield into a phase of high instability. 1946. As the sky over northern Ukraine sank into a thick layer of night clouds, a new Russian offensive prong began to reveal itself. Multiple weak infrared signals appeared on the sweep bands of Ukrainian tracking stations, indicating the movement of ultra-small Russian UAVs. These drones, only a few dozen centimeters long, carried high-resolution infrared cameras flying close to the hilly terrain to avoid detection. On the ground, Ukrainian Special Forces teams held positions at the northern defense line. They used modern night vision goggles to monitor every movement in the darkness. A Ukrainian soldier detected a faint glint reflecting off a UAV wing as the device skimmed over a treetop. He immediately signaled the fire team to prepare for interception. 1953, Russia deployed a special forces team from Me, 8 helicopters flying extremely low outside radar range. The Russian formation intended to air assault a Ukrainian radar station weakened by the previous cyber and jamming attacks. As the Russian helicopters approached the target, the commandos rappelled straight down onto the dark mountain slope. Rugged terrain caused the Russian insertion speed to be slower than calculated. In the observation sector, Ukraine positioned a long-range sniper team equipped with heavy caliber rifles. From hundreds of meters away, the Ukrainian shooter adjusted the scope to track the movement of individual Russian soldiers sliding down the ropes. Thanks to wind measurement systems and vision stabilizers, the first bullet flew true, striking the shoulder plate of a Russian commando, forcing the entire formation to halt and seek cover in the shadows. 20000. Russia brought a group of infrared-sensing UAVs into the fight to pinpoint the Ukrainian sniper team's location. Infrared dots swept across the mountain slope, quickly converging on the area with the heat signature of the sniper cluster. In response, Ukraine used thermal masking blankets covering the position to reduce the infrared signal to a minimum. 27 inches the valley nearby, a Ukrainian mobile team equipped with small demolition charges specialized for destroying materiel moved along the ridge to approach the potential Russian helicopter landing zone. They placed explosive charges at tactical points to neutralize the landing route. When one of the charges was triggered, the small bomb detonated cleanly, causing a section of rock and earth to collapse, forcing the Russian helicopters to back off. 2012. Thick darkness covered the entire area, leaving only streaks of light from infrared cameras and the sound of footsteps on gravel. Both Russian and Ukrainian sides were moving in a state of heightened alertness. The night was becoming a cloak for successive raids and counter-raids. 2015. Despite Russia pushing its infiltration efforts, the rugged terrain, Ukraine's precise firepower, and thermal camouflage systems had placed the entire raiding prong into a passive position. Tonight had become the decisive moment as both sides entered the most fierce phase of the engagement. 2, 3, 1, 2. The sea to the east of Ukraine was completely submerged in the darkness of thick cloud cover, leaving the water surface reflecting only spreading streaks of light from the infrared equipment of U.S. patrol vessels. Ukraine received intelligence that Russia was maneuvering an escort group approaching from the southeast at a steady speed. Analysis from the U.S. Navy indicated this group carried anti-submarine capabilities strong enough to sweep underwater targets within a range of tens of kilometers. Facing this approach, the Ukrainian command and the U.S. Navy agreed to activate a special naval tactic, wherein the main attack prong would come from a U.S. Virginia-class submarine silently lurking at a depth of hundreds of meters. At that depth, the U.S. submarine maintained absolute silence to avoid detection by Russia's active sonar. U.S. warfare officers monitored signals from the towed array antenna trailing behind the hull to analyze the Russian group's path. When the distance between the two sides dropped below 20 kilometers, the remote-controlled torpedo guidance system was activated. These mines were not released en masse, but were guided by fiber optic cables, only millimeters thick, to ensure they approached precisely into the gaps of the opposing formation. 2, 3, 2, 6. On the pitch-black sea, a squadron of Pate Ampere's Poseidon submarine hunters from the U.S. and Ukraine began to approach from the north. The aircraft dropped sonobuoys in a wide pattern to force the Russian group to change course, exposing a gap in the formation. This was the rendezvous point toward which the mines controlled by the U.S. submarine were advancing. At the determined moment, a mine activated its small propulsion motor and moved in a tight loop trajectory toward the lead escort ship. Electromagnetic warning signals appeared on the Russian control panels, but evasive reaction was slow due to the heavy interference layer created by the sonobuoys. The first mine detonated right beneath the bow of the Russian escort, causing massive water pressure that thrust the hull upward before it slammed back down onto the sea surface. The shockwave spread rapidly, destabilizing the ship's control system and forcing Russian sailors to lock the engines for several seconds to check for damage. Seizing this moment, the U.S. submarine continued to guide a second mine package looping around to the right flank of the Russian formation. When the mine contacted the magnetic field of the steel hull, it detonated, creating a water column tens of meters high, illuminated against the night sky. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Ukrainian Pate Ampere squadron dropped additional sonobuoy salvos to lock down the adversary's retreat path, causing the entire Russian group to withdraw in disarray. 2, 3, 3, 9. The coordinated campaign between the U.S. submarine and aerial anti-submarine forces forced the Russian fleet to depart the approach lane to eastern Ukraine. This battle beneath the surface and in the air marked the moment the entire campaign situation shifted, completely ending the phase of combat at its most ferocious intensity.